So when the mansion was built, it was the largest and most opulent home ever seen in the state of Florida. Stetson Mansion was built in 1886 for the famed hatmaker John B.Stetson, who decided to spend his winters in Florida. It's the only Gilded Age house built in the state of Florida, and it's the only grand mansion like this in Central Florida. So this is the sort of the grand jewel for this region. At the same time people think of mansions in Florida, the name Vizcaya might come into your mind. But Vizcaya wasn't built until the 20th century. It was started in 1914 and wasn't completed till 1922. You have to realize that at that time, when the Stetson Mansion was built, the population in Florida was tiny. Even when Vizcaya was built, Miami only had a population of 10,000 people, and 1,000 of them were working on building Vizcaya. The Stetson family home in Philadelphia, where he spent most of his time, was 36,000 square feet. He planned to build this home to be about 17,000 square feet, but his wife, Elizabeth, who hated the area because it was filled with mosquitoes and swamps, didn't plan to be here and thought if she just built a small house, they probably wouldn't spend any time here, so she got him to cut the size in half. But it didn't matter, they still spent 20 years here, till he died. And he died in the home on February 18, 1906. When John Stetson built the Stetson Mansion, he actually started tourism in DeLand. Because of John Stetson, he built the electric power plant, he built the ice making plant, 2 hotels, a golf course, encouraged Flagler to bring a railroad spur to DeLand, and because of that, DeLand started to grow as a tourist center. When he funded the university and stayed here for 20 years, that put DeLand on the map. If John Stetson had moved back up north when Henry DeLand left, I think the town of DeLand would have just shriveled up and died, and it would be a tiny hamlet like Orange City, which is nearby but very, very small. So because you had this bigger than life character and one of the wealthiest men in the world living in DeLand and attracting various people, whether it being President Cleveland or the King of England or Edison, Flagler, you had somebody that was drawing the attention to DeLand and bringing people to DeLand, and that's what helped encourage the town to grow. So the house is categorized as High Victorian, which is a combination of various different styles. It's almost as if they were just making a soup and they put all the things together, and the more things they could put together, the fancier their house looked. So they could impress people or show things from places around the world, because not that many people were able to travel around the world. So this house has Tudor, Gothic, Polynesian. You have a lot of Moorish influence, as you see from the 3 big arches in the front and all through the house. So it's quite a combination of various different styles, but mainly that's all together called High Victorian. It was very commonplace for Americans to take what was called the Grand Tour, and they would go to the great capitals of Europe. And if they were lucky enough and had time enough, then they would also touch on southern Spain. And southern Spain is the great center of where the Moorish architecture was very common, and Seville was the most popular destination to see architecture. So you have this interest in the Moorish architecture which comes from southern Spain. So when people would build a home like this, they would give examples of architecture from around the world that someone might see if they were taking the Grand Tour. If they couldn't take the Grand Tour, they could come to a house like this and see bits and pieces of the world, because you have to remember, we didn't have video or TV, or you didn't have airplanes, and not that many people could travel, so this would be a place that they could come and see bits and pieces of the world. It's very unusual to have a house of this grandeur not to have very ornate ceilings, especially at that time period. So somehow, somewhere along, he made the choice to put all his real detail into the floors. And so we have 16 different patterns of intricate inlay parquet floors that you really don't see very often. You don't see it any place in the Biltmore or the Flagler Mansion or any of the other spectacular places. They would do a simple stone or simple planks. So it's such an unusual feature, and all the floors in the mansion that you see today are all original. Typical houses of this era might have been filled with gas, have gas lamps. This house all had electric Edison lighting. Even when they had Christmas trees, I think this house had, you can see where the outlets are for where the first Christmas tree lights were plugged in. I think one of the things that was important about this house was that it was a center for a lot of decision making. It was sort of like the only show in town in Central Florida in this whole area south of St. Augustine. Anybody of any influence, whether it was Henry Flagler or Tiffany or Edison, that would come to this area would come to this home. This was the only home like it. It was the only person of substantial means in the area, and they would come and have conversations with Stetson. Every weekend, the Stetsons would have a band performing on the front porch. People from the community were invited. So it was really almost like the cultural center house of the town. So much easier to work with a house that has not been altered than to take on a historic house and try to restore it or try to update it to a house that's had major alterations. So the history has had somebody looking over it till the right people came along, and I think that's sort of how we were brought here. We didn't come looking for a historic house. It was the furthest from our imagination, but something brought us here. So this house definitely had something protecting it. A historic house museum might try to restore a house to a particular year or a particular date and time. But our method of restoring the home was as if the original wealthy Stetson family still owned and lived and used the property. So by doing so, they would not have kept the original pot-bellied stove in the kitchen. They would have put in at this time, like everyone else does today, a state-of-the-art, couple $100,000 kitchen, which is what we did. They wouldn't have kept the original clawfoot tub with no shower. They would put new bathrooms in. So through the house, although 95% of all the original architectural materials are all here, all intact, we've updated kind of like in a seamless fashion as if the original wealthy family was still here. We even have Cat 5 wiring in the house. You have wireless for internet. You have all these features that you just don't see. And if you are restoring a home and you want it to be functional for the present, for the future, and it's not a museum, which this home is not a museum, it has to have that ability to incorporate what's present. But when you come through it, you can't really see what are the changes. You can't walk through. We've never had anybody come on a tour and say, oh, I see they moved this, or I see they put this there. All the things that were added were done to blend with the home. We have guided tours throughout the year. We also have a big Christmas event that brings many thousands of people. The grounds are available for special events, and we are now opening our calendar to allow more weddings to occur here. The future of the Stetson Mansion is brighter than ever. Now that it has been restored and renovated with all the new infrastructure, high-end finishes, 13 new bathrooms and 5 kitchens, it's really ready to have another lifetime of purpose. It could continue to be the top-rated tourist attraction that it is now, or it could be a corporate office complex, a winery, wedding venue, med spa, hotel, or even just a magnificent family estate. An ideal use would be the Stetson University Alumni Center. Imagine the business school running the operations of the school's namesake home as a training ground for marketing and hospitality, students leading tours, and the president holding grand fundraising events. I expect the mansion to serve several functions over the next 100 years, just like it did for the last 100, and I'm excited to be a part of saving Florida's most historic home. We've felt more like caretakers of this home than owners, and we're kind of artists in the sense that we just like seeing that the work is done and that the work is saved, and that if it's still operating and the doors were still open. That's all that would really matter to us.